I'm Matt Donnelly. This is Viper Bites. And guess what? We are talking about my guys. This time we're heading to the quarterback position. And we're going to kick things off with Justin Fields. If there is a quarterback that can crack the top three that isn't named Patrick Mahomes, Jalen Hurts, or Josh Allen, it is Justin Fields. I'm sorry, Lamar Jackson. I'm sorry, Trevor Lawrence. And yes, I'm sorry, Joe Burrow. Now, Chicago, they added pieces to this offense, not only at the wide receiver position there in DJ Moore, but along the offensive line with the selection of Darnell Wright at the draft. They also added Nate Davis via free agency. They also added some running backs here, too. We talk about Rashawn Johnson there in the draft there, the running back out of Texas. Not to mention, they also were able to sign Donta Foreman away from the Carolina Panthers. We've already seen what these backs can do. Donta Foreman, we know that he's capable of carrying the load, much like he did for the Carolina Panthers. We've seen Rashawn Johnson so far in training camp perhaps be the best pass protector of the three-headed monster that is the Chicago Bears backfield. Now, Chicago, the additions weren't just on the offense. One area that fantasy managers typically tend to overlook, and that is the defensive side of the ball. Chicago's defense, it was horrible last season. They simply could not stop the run, ranking second to last in rushing yards allowed and last in rushing touchdowns surrendered. With the additions of TJ Edwards and Tremaine Edmonds, the Bears defense should get some more stops, allowing for this Bears offense more time on the field, which is great news to Justin Fields fans because on a per dropback rate, Fields was averaging 0.7 fantasy points, and that is per dropback. More dropbacks, that means more fantasy points. I'm not great at math, but that math, it seems rather obvious, and it seems to check out. Now, when looking at Fields, we know that what he's able to do with his legs, we know that he could run the ball. He could have broken Lamar Jackson's quarterback rushing record a season ago. We know that this Bears team, they're still going to be able to run the ball. Khalil Herbert has proven when given an opportunity and the volume, he can produce. We know that Foreman can be that lead back. We've seen it in the past. And hey, Rashawn Johnson, we don't know what you are yet, but you have a great career in store for you in the NFL. But I do know one thing, you are built to be a fan favorite in Chicago. Now, the Bears' ability to run the ball is going to open up things for Fields in the passing game, especially when we're talking about those run-pass options or play action. Fields is one of those rare quarterbacks that if the first read isn't necessarily there, he can work out a structure and make plays as evidenced by his 231 passing yards of such, which was fifth amongst quarterbacks last season. And Fields, he only played in 15 of 17 contests. With those improvements on both sides of the ball, that is going to translate into more trips to the red zone. And we know that Fields is able to punch the ball into the end zone when he gets down into that red zone. Last season, Fields completed 40% of his end zone passes, which was tied with Jared Goff at the seventh best rate. Fields, he now has a number one target there in DJ Moore, a solid number two in Darnell Mooney, and a good third option in Chase Claypool that, hey, we've seen what Claypool and Fields can do when they're both healthy and both on the field at the same time. Just take a look at the Green Bay Packers game there, the first half in which he caught 5 receptions. He also has a top 12 tight end there in Cole Kmet and a much improved offensive line and an even more improved defense. If Fields says that he's going to throw for 4,000 yards, I believe him. I also believe that he's guaranteed to run for another 1,000 yards. That's a 5,000-yard season coming for him, Justin Fields, which is going to navigate him right into that top 5 conversation. Another one of my favorite quarterbacks, maybe it's because I love Ronnie Bass and remember the Titans, but Trevor Lawrence, like Justin Fields, is in that next tier of fantasy quarterbacks. If you don't feel like you want to invest a selection on a quarterback in the first 3 rounds of your fantasy drafts, then Trevor Lawrence is a solid option that you can get in the 5th round or later with a current ADP of 56. All Lawrence needed was an actual football coach for him to ascend to be one of the top quarterback options in fantasy football. After a disappointing 2021 under then head coach Urban Meyer, Lawrence took a giant leap under Doug Peterson in 2022. Lawrence saw his completion percentage improve from 59% to 66.3%. His touchdown rate, it jumped from 2% all the way up to 4.3%, and his yards per attempt went from 5.2 to 7.3. Lawrence is the last of the quarterbacks that I feel comfortable finishing in the top 12. After that, there's some quarterbacks that definitely can push themselves in there, but their chances of being in the top 12 are just as good as being outside of the top 12. The Jaguars offense has all the pieces to be a top 5 scoring unit after being the 9th best scoring team a season ago, averaging 23.9 points per game. Christian Kirk, he finished with over 1,100 receiving yards. Travis Etienne had over 1,100 rushing yards. Throw in Zay Jones and even Evan Ingram there. They each had over 750 receiving yards. And the Jaguars, they're adding Calvin Ridley to this lineup this season. In fact, the last time that we saw Calvin Ridley play at least 15 games, he caught 90 passes of 143 targets for 1,374 yards and 9 touchdowns. Lawrence clearly gets an upgrade here. He's trading Marvin Jones for Calvin Ridley. I mean, that's a win right there for the quarterback aid in fantasy from just a season ago. Per fantasy points data, Lawrence had the 4th most passing yards in the 2-minute drill last season with 678. That trailed just Justin Herbert, Tom Brady, and Josh Allen. Maybe it means nothing, or maybe it means that, hey, Doug Peterson, he trusts his young quarterback to make plays when the plays need to be made. Even when Lawrence wasn't at his best, and I'm looking at that wild card game there against the Chargers, Peterson still trusted his young quarterback to go out there and make plays happen. And he did that, making one of the greatest comebacks in NFL playoff history. Now the third-year quarterback, we know that he can get the job done. So he could be taking another step here in 2023. Lawrence is going to be looking to build off his previous season there where he threw for 4,113 yards. He threw for 25 touchdowns. If Lawrence and the Jaguars were in the NFC, we could be talking about them in a completely different manner as favorites to reach the Super Bowl. In college, we saw what we needed to see out of Lawrence. We know that he can be an effective runner when asked to do so. Perhaps we see more of that in 2022 in his second year in this offense under the same coaching staff. Now, I don't think that we've seen Lawrence's ceiling yet, and that addition of Ridley could bring us closer to that realization. Now, thankfully for the New York Giants, they were able to get things figured out there with Saquon Barkley heading into this season, and Daniel Jones is going to be a much better quarterback because of it. I don't think people realize just how often Jones was hit last season. Jones was hit 101 times. Only Kirk Cousins, Russell Wilson, Geno Smith, and Justin Herbert were hit more often. When working from a clean pocket, Jones completed 84% of his passes, something only Patrick Mahomes and Kyler Murray did better. Now, the one knock on Jones last season is he didn't throw the ball deep. He was last in deep throw rate at 4.3%. Then again, his options in this Giants passing game were pretty much limited to Darius Slayton and Isaiah Hodgins, and whichever plumber they were able to pull off the street that could catch a pass. Entering 2023, he still has those targets, plus Darren Waller, more on him in a second, and a pair of legit deep threats in Paris Campbell with 4.31 speed and Jalen Hyatt, who has 4.4 speed. And what's weird about all this is Jones, despite not throwing the ball deep, actually had the second highest passer rating on passes greater than 20 yards. Even with Saquon Barkley in the backfield, Jones accounted for 32% of the team's carries inside the 5-yard line, which was the 4th amongst his quarterback peers, and his 19 yards per game on designed runs, that was the 5th most. This season, while the threat of Jones to punch it in remains, he also has Darren Waller at his disposal. And we know when the Giants get down in the red zone, they will be looking to dial up Darren Waller's number. He has been unguardable, especially down in that red zone area for much of training camp. We know that Dable protected Jones basically from himself last season, but Dable and Kafka, they could unleash Jones a little bit more this season while creating mismatches for Waller and the threat of Barkley being ever present. Now, currently, Jones' ADP of 103. He is coming off the board as QB 14. Jones is coming off a season in which he finishes the quarterback 7 ahead of Trevor Lawrence, ahead of Justin Herbert, while averaging 18.4 fantasy points per game. Now, let's keep talking about quarterbacks that are being underappreciated when you have options like Justin Jefferson, TJ Hawkinson, and Jordan Addison in the passing game. You know you can throw the ball. Kirk Cousins, he has to be the most underappreciated, undervalued quarterback to play in the game today. And perhaps it's because he has a history of not performing during prime time. Perhaps he loses points because he shops at Kohl's. I don't know what it is, but what I do know is Cousins, he can sling it when he has to. Cousins ranks 10th all time in passing yards on a per game basis, averaging 261.5 yards per game. He may not win the big one, but he's going to win plenty of fantasy showdowns for your fantasy squads. Since 2019, Cousins is averaging 18.5 fantasy points per game. Those numbers, they're unlikely to slow down anytime soon. We've seen this Vikings pass rate increase each of the last couple seasons. In 2021, it was at 57%. In 2022, it jumped up to 63%. Now, I think it's reason to believe that the additions of Jordan Addison and the departure of Dalvin Cook could push that number closer to 66% here in 2023. Well, I mentioned that Justin Fields connected on 40% of his end zone passes. Kirk Cousins connected on 42% of said passes. Give Cousins a clean pocket and he's going to produce. It's as simple as that. Cousins, he was the most hit quarterback last season, and yet he was fourth in catchable balls from a clean pocket, connecting on 83.9% of his passes. He also connected on 64.4% of his deep targets, which also ranked top 5 among signal callers. If you put Joe Burrow's numbers next to Kirk Cousins, and I'm talking completion percentage, QB rating, touchdown to interception ratio, you may be surprised at whose numbers are actually better. Yet one quarterback has an ADP of 32 coming off the board as quarterback 4, while the other is QB 13 with an ADP of 107. Now, don't get it twisted here. Burrow is the better fantasy option, but the gap isn't as great as the ADP would suggest. And finally, speaking of ADP, with an ADP of 92 and coming off the board at quarterback 11, the risk is already baked into the cost. We're talking about Tua Tagovailoa, who could be a top 5 quarterback this season if he's just able to stay healthy. And then again, if he misses 6 games due to injury, he could fall outside the top 20. Now, Tagovailoa finished as a QB 15 last year in fantasy, despite missing 3 games due to concussion and leaving a pair of games early. On a per-game basis, Tagovailoa was tied with Daniel Jones for 7th, averaging 18.4 fantasy points per game. And after leaving a couple of those contests earlier, that number's a little bit misconstrued. It should be a lot higher. Now, Mike McCarthy was talking about some of the differences in his quarterback in training camp versus what he saw last season. In general, Tagovailoa is stronger neck, stronger cord, and McDaniels and Tagovailoa have prioritized his health and confidence this offseason. Listen, this Dolphins team will only go as far as Tagovailoa's health can take them and that left arm. It was a very different team with Teddy Bridgewater and Skylar Thompson under center last season. Even with Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle, neither quarterback was able to replicate any kind of success that Tagovailoa had. Now, Tagovailoa averaged 8.9 yards per target last season, and he was able to get the ball into his playmakers' hands because Tagovailoa knows one thing. He knows you have to let the singers sing and the dancers dance. Miami is going to have one of the more explosive offenses in the entire league. As long as Tagovailoa is distributing the ball, Miami, they were 11th in points per game, averaging 23.8 per contest, and 8th in total yards per game, averaging 257.1. And that's with Tagovailoa missing some time. Now, he was also the only quarterback that is able to support 2 receivers who have averaged over 3 yards per route run since 2018. Now, we've talked about how good Fields and Cousins were on throws to the end zone. Well, no one was better than Tagovailoa, who connected on 52% of those passes. Now, Tagovailoa's gaudy stats don't end there. His throw rate on deep targets, 70.9%, which was 3% higher than the next closest quarterback in Joe Burrow. His catchable throw rates trailed only Aaron Rodgers at 87.8%, and with Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle's speed, Tagovailoa was able to post a 125.9 passer rating on passes over 20 yards, which was aided by the fact that 70.9% of his set passes were deemed as catchable deep targets. If Tagovailoa can stay healthy, there's no telling how good this Dolphins offense may be and what they could accomplish for fantasy in 2023. Now, with that all being said, make sure to hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, and make sure you're getting ready for more content coming right here on the Vipers Network.